Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters and friends. Welcome to this week's GDM show, the Global Dawah Movement Show. On this week's show, we're back with Brother Sabur. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalam.
How are you?
Good. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, so this week's show is a little different. It's a little special because we're not talking about any specific topics, but what we're doing instead is talking about an upcoming event, the Failed Hypotheses, which is on this Saturday, 12th of December in London. So firstly, what is the Failed Hypotheses?
Okay, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
What is it all about? There's so much online hype about this event. People are sharing the posts. People are really excited about this workshop. To give the answer in a very simple way, the failed hypothesis is when you try and use science or scientific conclusion to prove the Quran is divine, or vice versa, you try and use a scientific conclusion to try and prove the Quran is incorrect.
Okay.
So when you do either of those things, you are using a time-bound message, a time-bound conclusion which can change, and you're trying to compare it to something which doesn't change, and this approach is a failed hypothesis.
Okay. As far as the content of the course is concerned, the failed hypothesis is also one of the key topics that will be covered in the day,
Sure.
right? So let's go straight to the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
People are going to turn up, say at 9 o'clock. I think 9:30, 9 o'clock is the registration. They're going to come in.
Yep.
They're going to sit down. What's the first thing that they're going to go through? What's the first topic that's going to be discussed?
Well, the first topic, I think, and this is a good opening for the whole day, is the relationship between Islam and science. Muslims, as the religion of Islam teaches us, we should not be anti-scientific. In fact, the genesis of the scientific method itself was in the Islamic world, and Hassan ibn Haytham, the very first scientist, according to David C. Lindbergh and others. So we have a very rich history of scientific advancement in the Muslim world.
Yeah.
So we should embrace science. We should embrace its ideas, and we should work within the scientific field.
Yeah.
So the impact of Islam upon the history of the world, especially the history of science, that will be the very first topic.
Okay, good. So essentially what we're doing first is to show and share the relationship between Islam and science
Yep.
and the history. Excellent. Following that, once all of us they have a better understanding of what's going on as far as Islam and science is concerned throughout history, the next key subject that we're going to touch upon, I believe, is
The limitations.
Limitations of science. Okay, so what's that all about?
Okay, now this is very important. Science works. Science is a really amazing method. But what's really important for us to understand is the actual method itself allows conclusions to change. So for example, scientists may come together and say this is a conclusion of ours, and they may have a consensus upon that for 100 years, but you might get some new information that comes along that changes your previous conclusion.
Okay.
Or your previous data, there's a new interpretation that comes along,
Okay.
which gives a completely different conclusion. So the scientific method is not anti-scientific to say scientific conclusions can change. We're not belittling science.
Yes.
In fact, we are promoting science because we're saying its conclusions can change. And why do they change? That's what that section's
Okay.
about. The limitations and the beauty of science.
Right.
The fact that it's in flux, it's dynamic, it can change.
Right, that'll cover things like the problem of induction, the limits and
Empiricism,
scope
yep.
of science, and so on and
Yep.
so forth. Okay, fantastic. So at this point, inshallah, the people that attend, what they're going to get is a holistic understanding of what the scientific method is, what it can and what it can't do, basically, right? Fantastic. At this point, moving on, the next subject that we're going to go into is one of much interest to me, and I'm sure it's to many Muslims out there. It's a hot potato topic. It's been around for as long as I can remember, which is the topic of evolution, in particular Darwinism, right? So the next topic is Darwinism 2.0.
Yep.
So what is going to be covered in that? I believe that's your section that you're going to be touching upon.
So that's Darwinism 2.0, the changing face of evolution. Now, in the very beginning, we're going to go over what is evolution and what is the Darwinian mechanism, because these are two very different things.
Yeah.
There is an observation. There are certain things that we can see in the world around us. We can see there's change in the living environment over successive generations. Now this is basically evolution. Then you have an explanation of that, which is the Darwinian mechanism, which is common ancestry, the tree of life, natural selection, random mutations.
Yep.
So we're first going to define what is evolution, what is the Darwinian mechanism. Then we're going to go into, well, as you know from the previous sections, all scientific conclusions can change. Here are some examples of core Darwinian evolutionary ideas which have a lot of disagreement, which there is a lot of novel interpretations and novel data that's come up that doesn't fit within the framework. So we go over things from sociology, we go over things from biochemistry, and it's quite interesting that the popular perception is there's a nice clear picture, there's a consensus of biologists when it comes to Darwinian mechanism. It's a nice, neat diagram, and they're just sort of fine-tuning it and filling in the gaps. It's actually a lot more dynamic than that. I mean, just to give you one understanding, one key piece of data that will help you understand just how dynamic the field is, evolutionary biologist Michael Rose from the University of California, he speaks about the complexity of biology is similar to quantum mechanics. So it's a living, diverse field with lots of new data that comes in, which goes against previous data, new interpretations. So we're going to go over that. And this is going to be quite an interesting section because we're not going to be using, people that are creationists, people that are intelligent design proponents, or people with religious ideas. We're going to be speaking about secular scientists using the naturalistic methodological naturalism. They believe in that. And we're just going to be speaking about valid differences when it comes to Darwinism.
Okay, so that's a lot of things we're going to be covering there. This is going to be holistic, right? You're going to be tackling it from different angles, sociologically, evidentially.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll also say, look, a Muslim can accept the Darwinian mechanism to be a working model, a good working model.
Yep.
You can use that, you can work within the field, and you can gain new data.
Okay.
You can make advancements. We're not saying reject it.
Okay, so it's something to come and attend, basically.
Yeah.
It's going to be a really interesting section. The following section after this is going to be on the key assumptions of science, right? And what we're going to basically touch upon in this section is something very interesting, is because we talk about science, the beauty of science, the limitations of science, and so on and so forth, what it can and can't give us. Seldom do we ask the question, how could we do science in the first place?
Yeah.
Right? Science itself, the method, requires many assumptions, but two key assumptions it requires is a universe, a world, a reality that we can understand and is ordered to some extent, and a rational mind, right? A mind that has the ability to understand reality, comprehend it, observe it, try to reason over it, and so on and so forth. We have both of these things. Now, what we're not going to be doing is saying, challenging the assumptions of science. Well, how do you account for them? They don't make sense in naturalism. We're not going to be taking a presuppositional approach. Instead, what we're doing is we're accepting them as foundational. They are what they are.
Axiomatic.
Yes, they're axiomatic. But what I'm doing instead, what we're going to be doing is asking a very important question. What best explains them? Right? Because there are these realities. A rational mind, for example, is a very profound reality. It's not as easy as saying, well, it is, we're just rational and accept it and fine. It's almost like saying, you got a handful of Scrabble pieces, you throw them up in the air at random, and somehow they land in a very precise order, spelling words, perfectly spelled words in columns and rows, like a crossword, and they somehow just manage to be that way. And this is the reality when we look into our universe, for example, and our rational minds. They're very ordered, they're very precise, and they work in cohesion with each other. So what we're going to be doing is discussing these two assumptions and asking the question, what best explains these assumptions? Is it naturalism? Is it Darwinian evolution or any other type of evolution? Or is it Islam? Does Islam give us a comprehensive answer to?
Or theism in general.
Theism in general.
What's really interesting about this section that you're delivering about the assumptions of science, I think this is probably, amongst all the topics, the most important in a general sense. The reason why is because we've seen this very crude idea propagated that science somehow leads to atheism, that science leads to secularism. Science doesn't lead to these things. In fact, to do science, the best account of the assumptions of the scientific method is a theistic framework.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite powerful, because you find all these guys, like, for example, actually I'm not going to give examples now, but you find very popular scientific figures who write about, God being not true, and, all these other sort of ideas. And to do your very science that has propagated you up to this very high level, this almost priesthood level, you would need to accept the theistic framework.
Yeah,
So
to
it's
account
quite-
for its
Of
assumptions.
course, yeah. So I think this is a very, very important section.
Yeah, and we're gonna discuss a lot of things. In another thing, interesting thing we're gonna see is how denying God in some way or the other, which we're gonna discuss in the day, leads you to deny the theory of evolution itself, right?
The Darwinian
Yeah,
mechanism,
the Darwinian
right?
mechanism
Yeah.
itself. How that is, we're going to discuss in the day. You're going to find out, inshallah. Following this, we're moving on to another very, very important topic, maybe the most important topic of the day, especially for the Muslims, which is the failed hypotheses, scientific miracles in the Quran.
Yeah.
Give us a bit of information.
Okay, this is the topic which is quite controversial. The reason it's controversial is because a lot of people use the scientific miracles in the Quran, and what we're basically saying is the Quran is a miracle. The Quran can be shown to be a miracle. The fact that it has a linguistic structure, the linguistic argument, historical argument, the sociological argument. There's a myriad of arguments we
The
can use.
multi-layered approach, which is the new approach.
There's loads of arguments you can use to show the Quran is divine. But what we're saying is we have to, as Muslims, first and foremost, be truthful. And in order to be truthful, we always have to go back to the foundations of things. The Quran is an unchanging text. It is something that we have from the Creator. And science is something whose conclusions always change. According to the history of science, according to the philosophy of science, its conclusions change. So how can you use something which changes and is in flux, which is the beauty of it, to try and prove something which is not changing?
It's absolutely, it doesn't make sense.
There's a direct contradiction here, and I believe that using other miracles of the Quran is much more powerful than the scientific miracles in the Quran, and I think it can be quite counterproductive.
Yeah.
So what that basically shows is that we do not understand the scientific method if we assume that its conclusions are fixed, and then we try and use that to try and prove the Quran is true. We don't need to do that. I mean, this is a very ridiculous idea. If you look back 70 years ago, there was a scientific consensus. The universe was eternal.
Yes.
The universe always existed. There was a consensus on this idea. Einstein believed in it. Many great astronomers, scientists believed in this idea. And this was a scientific fact, if you want to call it. And that was in direct contradiction with the Quran. The Quran said the universe has a beginning. 70 years ago, science said, no, it is eternal.
Yeah.
The steady state model. So after some time, scientists changed their ideas as new data came in from the Hubble telescope and background, radiation. So they came up with the Big Bang model, and some people looked at the Big Bang model and looked at the Quran and said, the Quran's correct. It said this 1400 years ago.
Yeah.
But what would you do if you were alive 70 years ago and the scientists were saying the universe is eternal and the Quran is saying the opposite? You wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So don't set yourself up for a fall, because today scientists are saying the Big Bang is the truth.
Yeah.
And many scientists don't understand the philosophy and the history of science, so they'll say this is never going to change, this is a fact, this is true. But some physicists may come.
Well, there are some physicists saying that there is no Big Bang, the universe is eternal in its past.
They are small in number at the moment.
But there is that view out there.
There is that view out there.
And science allows
and
for that
in
room.
20, 30 years' time, there could be a consensus. Actually, the universe has always existed.
Yeah.
So what are we going to do then?
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to be consistent and say, Quran is Quran, science is science. Do not use something which is time-bound and something which is timeless and try and marry them.
Yeah,
it doesn't work.
And I'm just going to go into a lot of detail.
Yeah.
And people that attend, anyone that has any specific questions regarding this, you're going to get the full opportunity to ask him, go through this with him extensively until everyone is satisfied, inshallah. That's the whole point, right? So the point is to get the truth across, and so ensure that people are satisfied.
Because look, this is a very important thing. I get this contention a lot. You're taking away the scientific miracles in the Quran from us, but it works. Look, Allah's deen doesn't need you. It doesn't need me. It doesn't need anyone. It's going to spread. It's going to spread everywhere, and this is a prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we don't need to worry about that. Islam is going to spread. We are going to give the message of Islam, of Tawheed. Now, if there is a method that you're working with, which is working and is producing results, and people are coming to Islam. But there is a problem, fundamental problem in that method. Then what we need to do is drop that method and use the correct method. Linguistic miracle, sociological miracle, the historical miracle. Yeah. Don't use something, we're not, we shouldn't be using something just because it works. We should be using something if it's true. Allah says in the Quran that, be just even if it is against yourselves.
Yeah.
I would love to go around and say the Quran has scientific miracles, look at the Big Bang, look at this, look at this, look at this, and ask someone to become Muslim. But we have so many other evidences. Yeah. And we are more committed to truth than, for Muslims, our very first priority is to speak the truth.
Yes.
Because Allah loves the people who speaks the truth. So we have to be very honest and say, this approach has worked. Many people have come to Islam, but it's not the right approach, and we should put our hands up and say, let's use a better approach.
Yeah. And inshallah, we Hamza, Allah's blessed Brother Hamza and everyone else to come across a far greater approach, I believe, which is the timeless approach to the Quran, which he's going to go into again.
Interestingly, but I think it's a very important point to note. It's not even his idea.
Yeah.
It's not even his approach. Yeah. This has been around for a long time. We're just trying to popularize it. But scholars for a very long time have said, don't use the science in the Quran.
Yeah.
But people ignored them. Yeah. All we're doing is we're popularizing a scholarly view which has already existed for a very long time.
I think that covers it. So brothers and sisters, make sure you attend on the 12th of December, which is this coming Saturday. We've just briefly touched upon the topics to give you guys a brief sort of summary overview of what's going to happen on the day. When you come on the day, you're going to get information overload, but it's going to be a good type of information overload. It's going to be the type of information overload that you guys need, that we all need, and we all want to acquire and understand these sort of ideas and concepts so we can go out and give effective dawah, inshallah, and call people to the best way, which is Islam, the truth, inshallah. So make sure you register, make sure you guys attend this Saturday, and we'll see you there, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for watching. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.